Franklin Moore had spent 65 years building a spotless reputation, but the day Samantha Lowe, a 21-year-old college volunteer, walked into his life, his world of order and loyalty began to crumble. Within months, the respected banker became the center of a scandal so shocking it would end in betrayal, revenge, and death. All caught on camera in the heart of suburban America. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Franklin Moore had spent his entire life building a reputation that most men his age could only dream of. At 65, he was respected in his Colorado community, a retired banker, known for his steady hands, calm voice, and wisdom that came with years of experience. His house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, with a white fence and a lawn that looked like something from a postcard. To everyone who passed by, Franklin and his wife Linda were the image of stability. They had been married for 4 decades, and though the spark of youth had long faded, there was still a comfortable rhythm to their life together. They ate breakfast by the same kitchen window every morning, talked about small things like weather and groceries, and spent evenings watching old television shows. Life was simple, predictable, and safe, exactly how Franklin liked it. But beneath the surface, something inside him had begun to stir. Retirement had brought more silence than peace. The house that once echoed with their children's laughter now felt heavy with quiet. Franklin often sat on his porch, sipping coffee, watching the young joggers pass by, feeling invisible. His wife was content with her gardening and church activities, but Franklin felt time slipping through his fingers. He started to question whether this calmness was really happiness, or just the slow fade of a forgotten man. He missed being admired, being wanted, being seen. It was during one of those community charity events that his life began to change. Linda had convinced him to volunteer for the annual neighborhood fundraiser. It was there, among tables covered with bake sale goods and donation boxes, that he first noticed her. Samantha Lowe. She was only 21, a college student with bright eyes and an energy that made everyone around her seem dull. She smiled at him when he made a small donation, thanking him politely, but something about her tone and expression made his heart beat faster. It was the first time in years that someone had looked at him with genuine attention, not as a retired man, but as a person worth noticing. Over the next few weeks, their paths kept crossing. Samantha seemed eager to listen whenever Franklin spoke about life, work, or finance. Her curiosity flattered him, and soon, he found himself offering advice and coffee meetings. She would laugh at his jokes, sometimes lightly touching his hand when she spoke. It all felt innocent enough at first, but for Franklin, it awakened something long buried, a sense of youth and power he thought he had lost. He began dressing better, shaving more carefully, even wearing cologne again. Linda noticed the changes but didn't question them. She believed her husband was simply trying to stay active. Franklin, however, was slipping deeper into temptation. Each time he met Samantha, he convinced himself it was harmless, but his mind was restless at night. He thought about her voice, her perfume, the way she looked at him. What started as admiration was quietly turning into obsession. He didn't realize it yet, but that fleeting feeling of being desired again would lead him down a path that would destroy everything he had built in 65 years. Franklin's encounter with Samantha quickly became more than a passing curiosity. What began as a casual friendship formed through community work soon turned into something deeper and far more dangerous. After their first few meetings, Franklin found excuses to see her again. He told Linda he was mentoring a college student for her finance project, and she, ever trusting, encouraged him. It gave Franklin a reason to leave the house again, to feel needed, to feel alive. Samantha, on the other hand, saw in him a man who listened without judgment, who praised her ideas, and who had the kind of financial stability most of her peers didn't. They came from 2 different worlds, yet both filled a void for the other. She gave him excitement, he gave her security. Their meetings became more frequent. Coffee shops turned into long drives, and professional advice became personal conversations. Franklin began buying her small gifts, a silver bracelet, a perfume bottle, little things that made her eyes light up. He told himself it was harmless, that he was simply helping a young woman who reminded him of his own daughter's youthful ambition. But deep down, he knew he was lying to himself. There was something electric in the air whenever she smiled at him, something he hadn't felt in decades. She made him feel young again, and that illusion was intoxicating. Samantha wasn't blind to his growing affection. She noticed how his voice softened around her, how his compliments became more personal, how his eyes lingered just a moment too long. She didn't stop it. She played along, enjoying the attention, the dinners and the expensive gifts that followed. Her life had always been a struggle: student loans, part-time jobs, and uncertain dreams. Franklin's affection felt like a shortcut to comfort. She told herself it wasn't wrong if both were getting something they wanted, but every time she looked into his aging face, a small part of her knew this couldn't last forever. Franklin's behavior started to change noticeably at home. He began staying out late, claiming he was helping Samantha with college work. Linda noticed the excuses but wanted to believe her husband was just being kind. Still, there were subtle signs she couldn't ignore: a faint, unfamiliar scent on his clothes, a different energy in his eyes, a distracted silence at the dinner table. Franklin was drifting away, and though Linda didn't yet understand why, her instincts told her something was terribly off. For Franklin, every lie came easier than the last. He started deleting messages, clearing call logs, and creating an entirely separate life behind closed doors. What he didn't realize was how visible his secret had become to the world around him. People in the community started whispering when they saw him at cafes with a much younger woman. Some thought it was innocent, others didn't. But Franklin was too lost in his fantasy to care. He had convinced himself that love didn't have to make sense, that maybe after all his years of loyalty and routine, he finally deserved to feel alive again. What he didn't know was that the same feeling of rebirth would soon become the very reason his life would begin to unravel, one secret at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Franklin's affair with Samantha became more reckless. What had once been secret lunches and casual meetups evolved into passionate encounters hidden in plain sight. He rented a small apartment on the edge of town, using it as their private retreat. It was a place where Franklin could shed the weight of his old life and pretend he was someone else. A man free from responsibility, free from age, free from the quiet expectations of marriage. Every visit filled him with adrenaline, a dangerous mix of guilt and excitement that blurred his sense of right and wrong. Samantha knew the risk but continued playing along, drawn to the thrill of it all and the material comfort Franklin provided. She had never been in control before, but now she held the strings of a man twice her age and loved how easily he obeyed her unspoken wishes. At home, Linda's world was slowly collapsing. She noticed Franklin's patterns shifting in ways she could no longer explain away. He stopped joining her for dinner, spent more time on his phone, and began locking his study door. He smelled of cologne she hadn't bought, and sometimes, when he came home late, there was glitter clinging faintly to his shirt collar. The distance between them widened, invisible but suffocating. Linda tried convincing herself it was a phase, that her husband was simply restless with age, but the unease in her chest grew heavier with each passing day. The man she had spent 40 years with was becoming a stranger right before her eyes. Franklin's lies became routine. He would tell Linda he was meeting old colleagues, volunteering late, or taking walks to clear his mind. In reality, every moment away from home was spent in that small apartment with Samantha, where they shared expensive wine and talked about life as if the rest of the world didn't exist. But deep inside, Franklin was living with constant fear. Fear of being caught, fear of losing his comfort, and fear of admitting that he was destroying his marriage for something that couldn't last. That fear began to show in his behavior. He became defensive when Linda asked innocent questions, quick to anger over small things, and distant even when she tried to reach out. Samantha, meanwhile, started growing bored. The excitement of the secret relationship began to fade, replaced by impatience. She wanted more money, more gifts, and more promises. Franklin felt the pressure, but his guilt made him comply. He started withdrawing savings, telling himself he would replace it later. The thrill that once made him feel young now made him anxious. He was losing control, and the cracks were beginning to show. The affair that once felt like a dream was turning into a burden. Every lie he told tied him tighter in a web he could no longer untangle. He began to sense Linda's suspicion, seeing the way she studied him when he spoke, the silence that followed his excuses. He could feel the walls closing in, but it was already too late. The secret that once made him feel alive was about to destroy everything he had ever loved. Linda had always been the kind of woman who trusted easily, who believed that love meant forgiveness and understanding, but over the past few months, her faith in that belief had been quietly breaking apart. She had seen too many signs to ignore. The sudden bursts of attention Franklin gave to his phone, the strange withdrawals from their joint account, the smell of expensive perfume that lingered on his clothes. Each clue was like a whisper in her ear, telling her that something was wrong. Something dark was hiding behind her husband's calm face. Yet even then, she tried to suppress the thought. The idea of Franklin being unfaithful after 40 years of marriage seemed too painful, too humiliating to accept. Still, the growing tension inside her refused to rest. She needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. One afternoon, while Franklin was out running errands, Linda sat at the kitchen table staring at her laptop. She had seen an advertisement for small wireless security cameras. Simple, discreet devices often used for home safety. A thought crossed her mind that made her stomach twist, but she couldn't push it away. Maybe if she installed a few cameras inside the house, she could finally know what was really happening when she wasn't around. It was a decision made not out of anger but desperation. She ordered the cameras the same day. When they arrived, she placed them carefully, one near the living room bookshelf, another facing the main hallway, and one more in the corner of the kitchen. They were small enough to go unnoticed, and Linda made sure Franklin wouldn't suspect a thing. Days passed without any revelation. The footage showed nothing unusual, just Franklin reading, watching television, and making coffee. For a while Linda began to think she had overreacted, that maybe her fears were just imagination fueled by loneliness, but that sense of relief was short-lived. One Friday morning, while going through the camera files, Linda saw something that made her blood run cold. The living room camera had captured Franklin returning home in the middle of the afternoon. He wasn't alone. A young woman entered with him, smiling, laughing, carefree. Linda froze as she watched her husband guide the woman toward the couch, holding her hand like he once held hers. The camera caught everything: their closeness, their comfort, unmistakable intimacy that shattered any last bit of doubt. It was her home, their home, being used as the stage for betrayal. Linda's heart pounded as tears blurred her vision. She watched the footage again and again, as if replaying it could somehow change what she saw. But the truth was undeniable. The man she loved had not only betrayed her, but had done it under the same roof where they had built their life together. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house reminded her of the footage. The walls felt tainted, the air heavy. In that darkness, anger began to grow where sorrow once lived. She didn't yet know what she would do, but she knew one thing for certain: she would not stay silent anymore. Linda spent the next few days in a state of quiet torment. The video she had watched replayed endlessly in her mind, every frame burning into her memory like a wound that refused to close. Franklin's laughter with the young woman echoed in her ears, mocking the years she had given him, the sacrifices, the loyalty, the countless moments of support she had offered through every hardship. For the first time in her life, she felt invisible. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about humiliation. He hadn't just cheated. He had done it in their home, the place she had filled with love and care for 40 years. The thought made her stomach turn. She wanted to confront him immediately, to scream, to demand answers, but she knew that emotional outbursts would only give him control of the situation. So instead, she stayed calm, cold, and silent, waiting for the right moment to act. Franklin, meanwhile, had no idea that his world was about to collapse. He continued his double life as if nothing had changed, completely unaware that his secret had already been exposed. To him the affair was still something manageable, a private escape that no one would ever discover, but the truth was already spreading beyond his control. Linda, in her quiet fury, began to plot her revenge carefully. She didn't want confrontation, she wanted exposure. Her pain demanded something permanent, something that would ruin him the same way he had ruined her. Late one night, Linda uploaded the footage from the hidden cameras onto her computer. Her hands trembled as she edited out the identifying parts of their home, but left just enough for people to know who it was. The image of Franklin, with a young woman half his age, was unmistakable. She stared at the paused frame, the betrayal frozen forever, before finally hitting send. She sent it anonymously to a local gossip website that was known for exposing scandals involving well-known community members. It took only hours for the footage to spread. By the next morning, Franklin's face was all over social media. Headlines labeled him the retired banker caught cheating with a college girl. His neighbors whispered. His old colleagues messaged in disbelief, and strangers filled the internet with mockery. Samantha's identity was soon uncovered too, and she found herself flooded with messages, some hateful, others pitying. The video had destroyed both of their reputations overnight. Franklin's phone wouldn't stop ringing, his friends avoided him. Even his church, where he had once been a respected member, distanced itself from him completely. When Franklin finally realized what had happened, it was already too late to contain the damage. He tried to trace the source, but Linda's careful planning left no trail. Every time he stepped outside, he felt the weight of judgmental eyes. What was once his safe, respected world had turned into a cage of humiliation. The internet never forgets, and now, neither could he. The scandal had not just exposed his affair, it had taken away his dignity, his peace, and the quiet life he had spent decades building. Linda watched silently as his world burned, feeling a dark satisfaction she hadn't known she was capable of. But deep down, she also knew that what had begun as vengeance was quickly turning into something much darker, a chain reaction that no one could stop. The scandal spread faster than Franklin could comprehend. Within days, his once orderly life fell into chaos. The phone never stopped ringing. Reporters, former colleagues, even distant relatives wanted to know if the viral story was true. When he stepped outside, the stares from neighbors cut through him like knives. People he had known for decades now looked at him with disgust and pity. Overnight, Franklin Moore went from being a respected retired banker to a public embarrassment. His name was everywhere, on social media threads, in gossip groups, in whispered conversations, at grocery stores. Even the local newspaper hinted at the scandal, calling him a symbol of moral decline. He tried to ignore it, but the weight of humiliation became unbearable. At home, the silence between Franklin and Linda was worse than any shouting match could have been. She said nothing to him, not even a single word of confrontation. Her calmness frightened him more than anger ever could. She cooked, cleaned, and moved around the house like a ghost, as if he didn't exist. The distance between them grew into an invisible wall that suffocated the air. Franklin wanted to apologize, to explain, but there was nothing left to say. The betrayal was too deep, too public, and too raw to heal. Samantha's life had also spiraled out of control. After her identity was revealed, she became the target of online harassment. Strangers called her names, sent her threats, and shared her photos with cruel captions. Her college suspended her for behavior damaging to the institution's reputation. Terrified, she packed her things and left the city without saying a word to Franklin. When he tried to contact her, her number had already been disconnected. She had vanished, leaving him completely alone. The relationship that once made him feel alive had now become the source of his destruction. Days turned into weeks, and Franklin's mental state began to deteriorate. He stopped shaving, stopped answering calls, and spent hours sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. The house that had once felt warm now felt like a prison filled with memories of what he had lost. He blamed Linda for leaking the video, but couldn't confront her because deep inside, he knew he had brought this upon himself. Every time he looked at her, He saw quiet triumph in her eyes, a reminder that she had won, that she had taken back control. His bank accounts were frozen due to pending investigations from old colleagues who accused him of mishandling client funds. It wasn't true, but the rumors stuck easily now that his reputation was in ruins. Franklin began to realize that his entire identity had been built on respect, and now that respect was gone, so was he. His friends stopped visiting, his phone went silent, and even Linda's family refused to acknowledge him. One evening, he walked through the neighborhood he once proudly called home. The same neighbors who used to wave now turned away. The shame was unbearable. For the first time in his life, Franklin felt completely invisible yet painfully exposed. He had lost his wife's trust, his community's respect, and his own self-worth. And as he stood outside his house, staring at the life that was no longer his, a dark thought began to take root, that maybe there was only one way left to end the noise, the humiliation and the guilt that refused to fade. The following week brought an eerie stillness to the Moore household. Franklin barely spoke, barely ate, and moved through the rooms like a shadow. The weight of humiliation had crushed his pride, leaving behind a hollow man who no longer recognized himself. He stopped leaving the house altogether, afraid of the whispers and the pointing fingers. Even in his own living room, he could almost hear the echo of his neighbor's gossip through the walls. Every time he caught his reflection in the mirror, he felt disgusted. The man staring back at him wasn't the proud, respected banker he once was. It was a broken stranger, stripped of dignity, haunted by mistakes that could never be undone. Linda watched him quietly from a distance. Part of her felt vindicated seeing him suffer, another part pitied him. But her pity was buried deep beneath years of resentment that had finally surfaced. Still, she couldn't ignore the growing darkness in his eyes. He was unraveling, sinking deeper into despair with every passing day. At first she thought the silence would punish him enough, that watching his life collapse would be justice, but she hadn't expected how heavy the atmosphere inside their home would become. The smell of sadness, the stillness in the air, the quiet ticking of the clock that seemed to count down to something inevitable. One evening, Linda decided to talk to him, for the first time since the scandal erupted. She found him sitting in the garage, staring blankly at the floor beside his car. The faint hum of a radio filled the space, but Franklin didn't seem to hear it. His eyes were empty, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked fragile, smaller somehow, like the weight of his sins had physically crushed him. Linda noticed a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him, something he rarely touched before. For a moment, she considered walking away, but guilt pulled her closer. She wanted to end this silence, not to forgive, but to free herself from the bitterness consuming them both. Over the next few days, she tried to keep an eye on him, sensing something dangerous in his stillness. He began avoiding meals, spending hours in the garage for no reason. Late at night, Linda heard noises, the faint click of tools, the sound of the car door opening and closing. Her unease grew, and she decided to speak with him again the following morning. But by then, it was too late. That morning, Linda woke to the smell of exhaust fumes. Panic rushed through her veins as she stumbled toward the garage. When she opened the door, the thick gray smoke made her cough violently. Through the haze, she saw Franklin slumped in the driver's seat, the car engine still running, the doors sealed shut. For a split second, she froze in disbelief, then screamed his name, but there was no answer. She rushed forward, trying to pull him out, but the fumes overwhelmed her. She collapsed near the stairs, the world fading into darkness. Hours later, police arrived. After a neighbor reported the strange smoke, they found Franklin dead in the garage and Linda unconscious, barely breathing. The scene looked like a tragic suicide. A man crushed by guilt, ending his own life, while his grieving wife accidentally inhaled the fumes trying to save him. But when the toxicology report came back, a shocking truth emerged. Franklin had high levels of sleeping medication in his bloodstream. It was too much to be accidental. The quiet, devoted wife he had betrayed had given him one final dose, a peaceful escape disguised as mercy or perhaps revenge. but fate had turned cruel. In her desperate attempt to flee the scene, Linda's own fall left her barely alive, trapped in the ruins of the life they had both destroyed. When the investigation into Franklin Moore's death began, the police initially treated it as a straightforward case of suicide. Evidence seemed obvious: the car engine running, the sealed garage, the note on the dashboard that read, "I'm sorry." But as detectives combed through the details, inconsistencies started to surface. The handwriting on the note was shaky and uneven, unlike Franklin's usual neat script. The position of his hands on the steering wheel, the placement of the empty whiskey bottle, and the faint bruising on his wrist all hinted at something more complex than self-inflicted death. When the toxicology results revealed a high concentration of sedatives in his system, the narrative shifted completely. Franklin hadn't fallen asleep peacefully in despair. Someone had ensured he wouldn't wake up. Linda, who had survived the carbon monoxide exposure, was taken to the hospital in critical condition. When she regained consciousness days later, she was met with silence and flashing lights outside her room. Detectives were waiting to speak with her, but her condition delayed questioning. She was pale, weak and confused, with no clear memory of what had happened after she entered the garage. She remembered the smoke, the panic, and Franklin slumped behind the wheel, but the moments before that were a blur. The investigators, however, already had their suspicions. The sleeping pills found in Franklin's bloodstream matched a prescription bottle in Linda's name, discovered in the kitchen cabinet. As the investigation deepened, a picture of the Moores' final days began to take shape. Franklin had been spiraling, isolated, humiliated, and emotionally unstable. Linda had been quiet, observant, and deeply wounded. Witnesses recalled seeing her withdrawn in the days before his death, her demeanor colder than usual. Neighbors mentioned hearing faint arguments, and a pharmacy record confirmed she had refilled her prescription just 2 days before the incident. To the detectives, the pieces fit too neatly to ignore. They believed Linda had drugged Franklin's drink before leading him to the garage, knowing he would be too sedated to resist when she started the car. What they couldn't determine was whether she had planned to die with him or simply wanted to make his death look like a tragic suicide. The district attorney never filed formal charges due to Linda's fragile health and lack of direct physical evidence tying her to the act. She was released from the hospital months later, but she returned to an empty home that felt like a grave. The community that once admired the Moores now whispered about them with morbid fascination. Some saw her as a grieving widow, others as a murderer who got away. In time, the house was sold, the furniture auctioned, and the footage of Franklin's affair continued to circulate online as part of countless real-life scandal compilations. Samantha Lowe was never found again. Some claimed she changed her name and moved to another state, while others believed she too met a grim end in hiding. Years later, true crime enthusiasts would revisit the case on forums and podcasts, piecing together theories about what really happened in that garage. Some said Linda acted out of revenge. Others insisted she was driven by heartbreak and mental collapse. The story became more than just a tale of infidelity. It became a cautionary legend about how quickly love could turn to ruin, how pride could lead to downfall, and how a single betrayal could set off a chain of destruction that no one could stop. In the end, there were no heroes, only ghosts. A broken marriage, a lost girl, and a truth forever buried beneath the smoke of that silent suburban tragedy.